Why do we constantly praise garbage like The Room while actual masterpieces rot in total, undeniable obscurity? You think you know cinema, but you honestly don't. Your favorite cult classic is just mainstream trash for hipsters. Today, we are dragging 18 real cult classics out of the dirt. These movies were brilliant, dangerous, and highly controversial, and then they completely vanished without a trace. Prepare to feel entirely clueless. Number 18, Street Trash, 1987. If you want to know exactly how far independent horror could push the boundaries of good taste in the late 20th century, look no further than J. Michael Muro's 1987 masterpiece of melt cinema, Street Trash. The film takes place in a rundown Brooklyn liquor store, where the owner finds a case of cheap, decade-old booze called Tenafly Viper hidden in his basement. He sells it for $1 a bottle to the local homeless population. There is just one extremely horrific side effect. Anyone who drinks it instantly melts into a spectacular, neon-colored pile of glowing slime and internal organs. The film follows a group of homeless squatters living in an auto graveyard, navigating their daily survival while the Viper epidemic violently tears them apart. It is an incredibly gross, visceral experience, featuring infamous scenes of melt victims being flushed down toilets, exploding in porta potties, and having their limbs casually pulled off during petty arguments. But beneath the extreme gore, the film is a surprisingly compassionate, darkly comedic look at the forgotten, marginalized people living on the fringes of society. It was shot on 16mm by a very young director and a crew of college students, giving it a raw, gritty, authentic feel. It became a massive hit on the underground VHS circuit, yet it was simply too extreme for mainstream critics to stomach. It completely vanished from distribution for decades. It is a shocking, hilarious cult classic that disappeared, leaving behind only a toxic, glowing puddle of cinematic history. The vivid, colorful practical effects remain a staggering achievement in low-budget gore. Number 17, Neon Maniacs, 1986. The 1980s produced some of the most ridiculous monster movies ever made, but few are as utterly bizarre and inexplicably forgotten as 1986's Neon Maniacs. The film opens at the Golden Gate Bridge, where a group of teenagers having a party is suddenly attacked by a horde of hideous, deformed monsters. These creatures, each with a distinct gimmicky look like a soldier, a samurai, a decaying doctor, and a slime-covered ape, emerge from a mysterious cave underneath the bridge and slaughter almost everyone. Only a young girl named Natalie survives. The police, naturally, do not believe her story about monsters. Natalie teams up with a high school cheerleader and a nerdy kid who is obsessed with making monster movies to try and stop the creatures. They discover that the Neon Maniacs melt into green goo when they come into contact with water, leading to an absurd climax at a high school battle of the bands where the heroes use water guns to fight off the monsters. The film makes absolutely zero sense. It never explains where the monsters came from, why they look like rejected Halloween costumes, or why they only hunt teenagers. Despite its complete lack of logic, it is an incredibly fun, heavily atmospheric slice of 80s trash. Yet, it vanished completely. It never got a proper DVD release, leaving it as a phantom memory for those who rented it on VHS. A gloriously stupid, colorful mess that slipped through the cracks entirely. The incredibly weird synthesizer soundtrack only adds to the disorienting, dreamlike atmosphere of this nonsensical but entertaining obscure horror flick. Number 16, The Incubus, 1982. In 1982, the horror genre was saturated with slashers wearing masks, but The Incubus tried to do something entirely different by tapping into ancient, terrifying mythology. Set in the small, seemingly peaceful town of Galen, a series of horrific, sexually violent murders begin occurring. The victims are women, and the forensic evidence reveals that the attacker leaves behind a strange, acidic bodily fluid that burns the skin. Dr. Sam Cordell, the town's pathologist, begins to investigate and realizes the impossible truth. The killer is not human. It is an incubus, a demonic entity from medieval folklore that visits women in their sleep to assault them and drain their life force. As the town descends into panic and paranoia, Cordell desperately tries to find a way to stop a creature that defies the laws of physics and biology. The film is surprisingly serious and well acted, featuring John Cassavetes in the lead role, giving the bizarre premise a ground-level, gritty realism. It relies on a slow-burn sense of dread rather than cheap jump scares. Despite Cassavetes' star power and a genuinely terrifying concept, the film was completely overshadowed by bigger supernatural hits like Poltergeist and The Thing. It suffered from poor distribution and a misleading marketing campaign. The Incubus vanished into the shadows, a dark, unsettling, and deeply uncomfortable horror film that practically no one talks about today. A bleak, atmospheric chiller that tackled a difficult subject matter with surprising intelligence before disappearing completely into the dark, unforgiving cinematic void. The haunting nightmare sequences and the bleak small-town atmosphere make this a distressing, unforgettable viewing experience. Number 15. Blood Diner, 1987. If there was ever a movie designed to offend literally everyone in the room, it is 1987's Blood Diner. Two brothers, Michael and George, run a popular vegetarian diner. However, their menu has a very special secret ingredient: human flesh. The brothers are following the ancient teachings of their uncle, an imprisoned cult leader who brainwashed them into believing they must resurrect an ancient Sumerian goddess named Sheetar. To do this, they must collect various body parts from immoral women, stitch them together, and sacrifice a virgin on the night of a lunar eclipse. The film is a chaotic, gore-soaked, absurdly funny homage to the notorious 1963 splatter film Blood Feast. It features incredibly over-the-top kill scenes, including an infamous sequence where a man's head is shoved into a deep fryer, and a ridiculous subplot involving a rival gym owner who dresses like a superhero. Director Jackie Kong treats the horrific violence with the tone of a wacky sitcom, creating a deeply unsettling but hilarious contrast. It was a staple of the VHS era, loved by horror fans who appreciated its unapologetic trashiness. However, as the home video market shifted to DVD and Blu-ray, Blood Diner fell through the cracks. It received terrible transfers and zero marketing. It has completely vanished from the modern horror conversation, a sleazy, blood-drenched masterpiece of bad taste that has been unfairly erased from exploitation history. The relentless pacing and the demented performances ensure that you never look away from it. Number 14, Slacker, 1990. In 1990, Richard Linklater released Slacker, a film that single-handedly defined the indie cinema movement of the decade and coined a cultural term for an entire generation. The film has no traditional plot. Instead, it follows a seemingly random stream of young, overeducated, underemployed people wandering around Austin, Texas, over the course of a single day. The camera simply drifts from one character to another as they cross paths on the street, in coffee shops, and in apartments. We meet a guy trying to sell a pap smear, an anarchist who wants to overthrow the government, a woman obsessed with JFK conspiracy theories, and a man who just found a Madonna pap smear on the sidewalk. It is a brilliant, meandering snapshot of aimless youth, capturing the philosophical musings and extreme boredom of a generation that had no defining struggle. Shot on a shoestring budget of $23,000, it was a massive critical success, proving that you did not need Hollywood money to make a culturally relevant film. It launched the independent film boom that led to Pulp Fiction and Clerks. Yet, if you talk to anyone under the age of 30 today, they barely know it exists. Its cultural footprint has completely vanished, replaced by the very corporate indie machine it helped create, leaving it as a forgotten artifact of a much simpler, stranger time, a rambling, philosophical masterpiece that ironically predicted its own irrelevance. The iconic poster art and the distinct Austin atmosphere encapsulate a specific, fleeting moment in American pop culture. Number 13, Hardware, 1990. In 1990, cyberpunk was still a relatively new cinematic genre, and Hardware attempted to bring the gritty, high-tech dystopian aesthetic to the independent film scene. Set in a post-apocalyptic world ravaged by solar radiation and nuclear fallout, the film follows a wandering soldier named Moses Baxter, who buys a disassembled robotic skull in a desert scrapyard as a Christmas gift for his artist girlfriend, Jill. Unbeknownst to them, the robot is a prototype killing machine known as the Mark 13, designed by the government for population control. Once Jill reassembles the robot in her cramped high-tech apartment, it reactivates and begins a brutal, claustrophobic game of cat and mouse, trapping her inside. Directed by Richard Stanley, the film is a visual assault, drenched in neon colors, industrial noise, and metallic gore. It feels like a music video directed by a madman, perfectly capturing the bleak, metallic angst of the era. It featured early appearances by Iggy Pop and Lemmy Kilmister. Despite its incredible style and intense atmosphere, it was hit with a massive lawsuit by the creators of a short story who claimed the film stole their plot. The legal battle drained the distributor's finances, halting the film's momentum dead in its tracks. It was pulled from theaters and effectively buried. Hardware vanished, a highly influential, visually striking piece of cyberpunk history that most modern sci-fi fans have never even heard of, a rusted, bloody relic of 90s dystopia. The pounding, aggressive industrial soundtrack only amplifies the suffocating, claustrophobic dread that permeates every single frame of this forgotten sci-fi gem. Number 12, Phantom of the Paradise, 1974. In 1974, Brian De Palma directed a rock and roll horror musical that was supposed to be his massive breakthrough, but instead, it became one of the most baffling disappearances in cinema history. Phantom of the Paradise is a wildly inventive, satirical retelling of the Phantom of the Opera, Faust, and The Picture of Dorian Gray, all smashed together and set inside the neon-lit, seedy music industry of the 1970s. William Finley delivers an incredible, tragic performance as Winslow Leach, a naive, talented composer whose demonic rock cantata is stolen by a ruthless, corrupt music producer named Swan. After being framed for drug possession and getting his face mutilated in a record-pressing accident, Winslow dons a black leather outfit, a bird-like mask, and becomes the Phantom, terrorizing Swan's concert venue, the Paradise. The film features incredible, catchy music composed by Paul Williams, who also plays the creepy, undead Swan. It is a visually stunning, fast-paced, and deeply cynical look at the way the music industry chews up and spits out genuine artists. De Palma crafted it as a critique of the commercialization of rock music. Despite critical praise and a massive following in countries like Canada and Japan, it completely tanked in the United States. It vanished, overshadowed by Rocky Horror, leaving behind only a phantom echo of its former brilliance. A glittering, tragic fever dream that deserves a massive revival but remains trapped in the forgotten vaults of 70s cinema. The innovative split-screen techniques and the glittering, set designs make a visual masterpiece. Number 11, Meet the Feebles, 1989. Years before Peter Jackson was winning Academy Awards for The Lord of the Rings, he directed one of the most disgusting, depraved, and hilarious films ever conceived, 1989's Meet the Feebles. It is a puppet show modeled after the Muppets, focusing on the backstage drama of a variety show called The Feebles Variety Hour. However, these puppets are not family-friendly. There is Heidi, a massively overweight hippo who is the star of the show and is secretly bulimic. There is Bletch, a walrus who is the corrupt producer and regularly cheats on Heidi with a Siamese cat. Then there is Robert, a hedgehog who suffers from severe anxiety, and a psychotic Vietnam vet knife-throwing frog. As the broadcast approaches, the backstage chaos spirals into a nightmare of drug dealing, pornography, disease, and murder, culminating in an absolutely blood-soaked machine gun rampage during the live broadcast. Jackson shot the film on a tiny budget over 12 weeks, working grueling hours to manipulate the crude, oversized puppets. It is an astonishingly dark comedy that mercilessly parodies show business and shatters the innocence of puppetry. It became a massive cult hit on the underground festival circuit. Yet, due to its extreme content and legal threats, it never received a wide theatrical release in many countries. It has practically vanished from mainstream pop culture, a filthy, brilliant masterpiece of bad taste that most people are completely unaware exists. The unapologetic gross-out factor and the shockingly graphic puppet gore make this a completely unprecedented cinematic experience. Number 10, The Stuff, 1985. Larry Cohen was a master of taking absurd, B-movie concepts and turning them into sharp social satires, and 1985's The Stuff is his magnum opus. A mysterious, delicious, white, yogurt-like substance oozes out of the ground in a snowy quarry. Taste testers discover it is incredibly addictive and has 0 calories. It is quickly branded as The Stuff and marketed as the ultimate diet dessert. The problem? The stuff is actually a living, parasitic organism that eats you from the inside out once you consume it, turning its victims into mindless, zombie-like slaves who crave more of the white goo. The film follows Mo Rutherford, a rogue industrial saboteur hired by the dairy industry to find out what the stuff really is. Alongside a young girl who realizes the danger, Mo wages a bizarre war against the addictive dessert. Cohen uses the film to brilliantly satirize consumerism, corporate greed, and the dangerous allure of diet culture in the 1980s. The practical effects, where people's faces cave in as the alien goo bursts out of their mouths, are disgustingly fantastic. It had a strong marketing campaign, including actual tie-in commercials for the fake dessert, yet it failed to find a mass audience and was dismissed as a cheap horror film. It vanished into the VHS bargain bins, a sharp, hilarious, and gross cult classic that modern viewers have completely forgotten, leaving behind a brilliant, gooey warning about blindly trusting corporations. Michael Moriarty delivers a wildly unhinged, scene-stealing performance that elevates the absurd material into something very special and memorable. Number 9. Miracle Mile, 1988. Imagine answering a ringing payphone at midnight and being told that nuclear war begins in exactly 70 minutes. That is the terrifying premise of Steve DeYarnat's 1988 thriller, Miracle Mile. Anthony Edwards plays Harry, a quirky musician who finally meets the woman of his dreams, Julie, at a diner in Los Angeles. They plan a date for later that night, but Harry oversleeps. He rushes to the diner, answers the payphone, and hears a frantic scientist screaming that the United States has launched a nuclear strike, and missiles will hit Los Angeles in an hour. The connection is cut. Is it a prank, or is it the end of the world? The film transforms from a light-hearted romantic comedy into a relentless, real-time nightmare as Harry races against the clock to find Julie and escape the city. Panic spreads through the streets, looting begins, and society instantly unravels. It is a masterful exercise in escalating tension, capturing the specific, paranoid nuclear anxiety of the late Cold War era. The script was famous in Hollywood for years, passing through the hands of numerous directors before DeYarnat finally made it. Despite its brilliant concept and critically acclaimed execution, it completely bombed at the box office, overshadowed by bigger action films. It vanished, a forgotten masterpiece of apocalyptic dread that remains shockingly relevant today, a relentless ticking clock thriller that deserves to be mentioned alongside the greatest suspense films ever made. Stark contrast between the bright California setting and the impending, apocalyptic doom creates an overwhelming sense of pure dread. Number 8. Society, 1989. In 1989, director Brian Yuzna unleashed Society, a film that takes the teenage angst of John Hughes movies and violently mutates it into a grotesque, body horror nightmare. Bill Whitney is a wealthy, popular high school student living in an upscale Beverly Hills neighborhood, but he constantly feels like an outsider in his own family. He hears strange noises, experiences bizarre blackouts, and begins to suspect that his parents and sister are involved in some kind of sick, incestuous cult. He confides in his therapist, who naturally convinces him he is simply paranoid. However, Bill is right. The climax of the film reveals the horrifying truth. The wealthy elite of his town are not human. They are a different species of parasitic organisms that literally merge their bodies together in a massive, slimy, orgiastic pile of flesh and limbs, known as shunting, to consume the life force of the lower-class outsiders. The practical effects created by Screaming Mad George are some of the most revolting, unforgettable, and astonishingly creative ever put on screen. Bodies stretch, faces melt, and the wealthy literally absorb the poor. It was a massive hit on the midnight movie circuit, praised for its vicious satire of Reagan-era class warfare. Yet, due to heavy censorship and limited distribution, it practically vanished. Today, it is a mere footnote, a shocking social critique buried under its own spectacular goo. The sheer audacity of the finale and the grotesque practical effects ensure that you will never look at the wealthy elite the same way again. Number 7. The Quiet Earth, 1985. Long before I Am Legend or The Last of Us, New Zealand delivered one of the most cerebral and haunting post-apocalyptic films ever made. The Quiet Earth, released in 1985, begins with a scientist named Zach Hobson waking up to find that he is completely alone. He drives through empty cities, turns on automated radio stations, and slowly descends into madness, realizing that a top-secret energy project he worked on has wiped out every other living soul on the planet. The twist? The phenomenon didn't just kill people, it erased them from existence. Clothes are left perfectly folded on beds, and airplanes have fallen from the sky with no passengers inside. Eventually, Zach finds two other survivors, a woman named Joanne and a rugged man named Oppie. Instead of a standard survival story, the film dives deep into a tense, paranoid love triangle, complicated by Zach's terrifying realization that the disaster is not over. The fabric of reality is unraveling, and the world is about to change again. The film is a masterclass in slow-burn tension, relying on Bruno Lawrence's brilliant, isolated performance rather than special effects. Its ending is one of the most visually arresting and debated in sci-fi history. Despite critical praise and a strong cult following in its home country, it never achieved international recognition. It faded into obscurity, a quiet, brilliant masterpiece that vanished without a trace. Haunting images of empty highways and abandoned cities create a profound, unsettling atmosphere of absolute, terrifying isolation. Number 6. Cemetery Man, 1994. Italian horror has a rich history of gory masterpieces, but Michele Soavi's 1994 film Della Morte dell'Amore, released in America as Cemetery Man, is a profoundly unique entry that completely disappeared from the cultural landscape. Rupert Everett plays Francesco Della Morte, a deeply bored, cynical cemetery caretaker who lives in a crumbling Gothic mausoleum. His routine is simple: bury the dead, and when they rise from their graves 7 days later as mindless zombies, shoot them in the head. For Francesco, it is not a terrifying apocalypse, it is just a mundane, annoying job. The film takes a surreal turn when he falls in love with a beautiful, mysterious widow attending a funeral. Their passionate romance is violently interrupted when she dies and comes back as a zombie, forcing Francesco to blow her brains out. Driven mad by grief and existential dread, Francesco embarks on a dark, comedic journey, questioning the nature of life, death, and reality itself. It is a brilliant philosophical zombie film that focuses more on romantic melancholy and absurd humor than actual horror. It was a modest hit in Europe but was completely butchered by its American distributors, who dumped it into a few dozen theaters with a terrible marketing campaign. The film vanished, leaving behind a murky legacy of bad VHS transfers. It remains one of the most intelligent, visually stunning horror comedies ever made. Surreal hallucinations and the poetic, romantic dialogue elevate this far beyond a simple zombie movie into a genuine work of art. Number 5. Six String Samurai, 1998. In 1998, post-apocalyptic cinema got a bizarre adrenaline shot with Six String Samurai, a film that should have launched a massive franchise but instead vanished into absolute obscurity. Set in an alternate 1957, where the Soviet Union dropped the atomic bomb on America, the wasteland is ruled by rock and roll. The king of rock, Elvis Presley, has just died, and a massive power vacuum has opened up in Las Vegas. Buddy, a silent, stoic wanderer dressed in a tuxedo and carrying a hollowed-out guitar that doubles as a sword, treks across the irradiated desert to claim the throne. Along the way, he picks up an annoying orphaned kid simply known as the Kid, and must battle a ridiculous array of enemies, including a bowler hat-wearing villain who wants to replace rock music with synth pop. Directed by Lance Mungia, the film is a kinetic, hyper-stylized mashup of samurai cinema, westerns, and punk rock aesthetics. It features incredible fight choreography and a killer soundtrack by the Red Elvises. Despite premiering at Sundance and having the backing of the Mystery Science Theater 3000 creators, it suffered from a disastrous theatrical release by a studio that had no idea how to market it. It died at the box office, and today it is practically impossible to find a decent copy of it, leaving behind only a devoted, whispering cult of fans. Surreal, desert landscapes and the relentless, fast-paced action sequences make this an incredibly unique, unforgettable viewing experience. Number 4. Wavelength, 1983. If you want a movie that truly defines the phrase vanished without a trace, look no further than Michael Snow's 1983 minimalist sci-fi film, Wavelength. Do not expect laser battles or tentacled monsters. Instead, the entire 87-minute film consists of a single, agonizingly slow zoom across a massive, empty New York City loft. As the camera slowly pushes forward over the course of an hour and a half, we hear various sounds, see flickering lights, and witness minor events happening in the periphery. People briefly enter the frame, a woman cries, a man plays a saxophone, but the camera never stops moving toward the far wall. Halfway through, we begin to hear a strange, pulsating, low-frequency hum. Spoiler alert. By the time the camera finally reaches its destination, it reveals a photograph of ocean waves on the wall, and we realize the entire room has been vibrating to the frequency of an alien presence hidden in the space. It is a radical, incredibly boring, yet strangely hypnotic experiment in cinematic duration and perception. It won the Grand Prix at the Festival of Avignon and was championed by hardcore cinephiles as a masterpiece of structural filmmaking, but mainstream audiences rejected it entirely. It has never been streamed on major platforms, its physical copies are incredibly rare, and its legacy has practically evaporated. Deliberate use of color filters and the avant-garde structural approach make this a fascinating, though deeply polarizing piece of underground cinema history. Number 3. The Brother from Another Planet, 1984. Before he became a Hollywood heavyweight writing scripts like The Bourne Identity, John Sayles directed this incredibly low-budget, deeply thoughtful sci-fi allegory in 1984. Joe Morton delivers a mesmerizing, entirely wordless performance as an escaped slave from an unnamed alien planet who crashes into Ellis Island and flees into New York City. He looks human, save for his completely black, featureless eyes, which he keeps hidden behind sunglasses. As he wanders Harlem, his advanced mechanical abilities and innate empathy draw people to him. He fixes arcade games by touch and heals the sick, quietly observing the bizarre social dynamics of human beings. Meanwhile, two relentless alien bounty hunters dressed as straightforward white men in trench coats track him through the city streets. The film is a brilliant, subtle commentary on race, immigration, and the African American experience in the 1980s, disguised as an indie sci-fi thriller. It was a hit on the independent circuit, praised for its warmth, humor, and Morton's incredible physical acting. However, because it lacked massive special effects, exploding spaceships, or a massive marketing budget, it completely fell off the pop culture radar. It received a substandard DVD release years ago and has essentially vanished into the void of obscure cinema, rarely screened and practically forgotten by modern audiences, who often overlook the foundational indie films of the 1980s today. Humorous local bar scenes and empathetic direction create a special, hidden cinematic treasure. Number 2, Liquid Sky, 1982. Next up is a grimy slice of 80s underground cinema. Released in 1982, Liquid Sky is a grimy, neon-soaked science fiction film that perfectly captures the paranoid, drug-fueled underground of New York City's early punk scene. The plot revolves around invisible aliens that land on the rooftop of a downtown apartment building. These extraterrestrials feed on endorphins produced by the human brain during orgasm, but their method of extraction is instantly fatal. Margaret, a struggling fashion model and heroin addict, discovers that she has a symbiotic connection to the aliens. Every time a sexual partner climaxes near her, they die instantly, leaving behind a microscopic glass heroin-like substance that Margaret then uses to get high. Directed by Slava Sukerman, a Soviet émigré, the film is a harsh critique of the hedonistic 1980s club culture. It features bizarre stop-motion animation, synthetic electronic music, and incredibly deadpan performances from a cast of non-actors, including Anne Carlisle playing both Margaret and her male adversary Jimmy. Upon release, it became a massive midnight movie hit, celebrated for its utterly unique visual style and unflinching, shocking weirdness. It was a true cult phenomenon. Yet, if you ask modern sci-fi fans about it, you will get blank stares. Distribution rights became a legal nightmare, effectively erasing the film from physical media for decades. It has vanished from the cultural conversation, a brilliant, toxic relic of a bygone New York. Geometric clothing designs and the cold, alienating cinematography perfectly complement the film's strange, detached, and hallucinatory atmosphere. Number 1. The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, 1974. Our final entry is a completely insane collision of worlds. Set in 1904, this bizarre mashup pits Hammer Horror's iconic Count Dracula against a martial arts expert in rural China. Dracula, played with eerie stillness by John Forbes Robertson, abandons his crumbling Transylvanian castle to seek fresh blood in the east. He does this by possessing the body of a ruthless Chinese vampire lord, raising 7 undead warriors to terrorize a remote village. The only hope for the locals is an aging Professor Van Helsing, who is giving lectures in China. He teams up with a charismatic kung fu master and his 7 fighting siblings to destroy the undead threat. Directed by Roy Ward Baker and featuring action choreography by legendary Shaw Brothers filmmaker Chang Che, the film is a fascinating, bloody collision of gothic atmosphere and high-flying martial arts. It features dripping fangs, green-tinted vampire blood, and spectacular pole fighting sequences. Despite its insane premise, it actually works as a cohesive piece of entertainment. The film was a desperate, last-ditch attempt by the dying Hammer Film Studio to stay financially relevant in the 1970s by tapping into the global kung fu craze sparked by Bruce Lee. It failed miserably at the box office, completely alienating audiences who either wanted a traditional gothic vampire flick or a pure martial arts epic. Today, it is almost entirely forgotten, rarely discussed even among hardcore horror or kung fu aficionados. Yellowface makeup and Shaw Brothers sets create a strange vibe. But we are not done yet. The first half of this list barely scratches the surface of how brutal the film industry can be. Studios bury movies for the most ridiculous reasons, whether it is a lawsuit, an incompetent marketing team, or simply because audiences were not ready for the sheer madness on screen. The next 9 films are even more obscure, even more dangerous, and even more fascinating. Let's keep digging. Think your favorite underground movie is obscure? It honestly doesn't hold a candle to these 18 lost gems. Greedy studios destroyed them, lazy audiences ignored them, and time erased them from history completely. Which of these forgotten masterpieces are you tracking down tonight? Drop it in the comments below, smash the subscribe button, and always remember, the movies you think are cool are just mainstream lies. Real cinema is buried in the dirt.